So everyone, I'm really excited that you're here and reading this and looking through it. Something I've been thinking about for a while, and I think your input will be really wonderful to hear, sort of help this move forward. But also for teachers in Ecuador to be thinking about what does it look like to make really meaningful cultural connections for their students, and why even. So what I want to do is just start off by just asking what you all know about, or how have you used Bishop's model in your thinking about teaching and learning? That seems to be something that's come on in math ed more recently. It's a model that was published in, or a metaphor in the 80s and 90s, but I have heard about it recently at conferences and things like that. So tell me about your experience with the original Bishop model, or what you see it. How is it?
Well,
Yes,
I'll share.
we all have to be speakers now. This is one of
I,
those times where we can't
I,
let someone else speak. Yeah.
yeah, it was fairly recent in my life as a math educator when somebody said windows and mirrors, just those two constructs, and what that means for math teaching. And it just was like having a metaphor just helps big ideas like come into focus. So this idea of mirror seeing yourself and window seeing others, just that beginning point is so important for thinking about how you're planning a math lesson, how you're thinking about engaging students in that math lesson, windows and mirrors. That was the beginning for me.
Hmm. Hmm. That's great.
I I would also agree. Using the terminology windows and mirrors is probably new to me within the last 5 years. And I came across it from reading Rochelle Gutierrez's work, as she
Hmm.
talks about equity. And so when I think about windows and mirrors and how I've used it as an educator, I really think about the equity pedagogies and some of our culturally based pedagogies where we focus on creating these inclusive mathematics learning environments where we're looking at our students' sociocultural backgrounds, we're recognizing, we're respecting them, and we view them as being assets to our mathematics instruction.
Hmm.
So the sliding doors and more of Bishop's definition was very new to me.
Hmm. Yeah, I think the doors was always something that I spent a lot of time trying to get my head around. What is that? How does that move Windows a little bit forward? And then, you guys can see where I thought about. Arthur, I want to ask you specifically because, what I hear from Brea and Jenny both are really sort of ethnomathematics, but maybe not. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that certainly the sliding doors, well, the windows and the sliding doors certainly get us to think about ethnomathematics from the perspective of, looking at other cultures
Hmm.
and looking at other cultures, trying to understand the mathematics that they've developed as ways of resolving um, problems within the culture that needed to be resolved. And then the sliding door as a way of, okay, let us now understand from the point of view of actually practicing, stepping into the cultural practice and seeing how we might use some of those mathematical ideas and tools that were developed ourselves in order to think about mathematics within that cultural setting. Certainly, the idea of mirror gets us to think about the ethnomathematics of the students that we're working with, getting them to think about their funds of knowledge that are resonant within their families and communities.
Hmm.
So I think that we can think of windows and mirrors, windows, and sliding doors as um, being a way of approaching ideas of ethnomathematics.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um,
And
I
just
think what,
go ahead,
yeah.
Arthur.
No, I was going to sort of shift a little bit to talk about pedagogy,
Hmm.
because I think that these metaphors help us to understand ways of looking at mathematics, but they haven't approached yet how we teach the mathematics or
Mm-hmm.
how we engage the individuals in producing mathematics.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so that's something else to be worked on and to
Yes,
be thought
yes.
about within each of these categories.
Nice. Okay, there. That's a good set. Let me hear from Sue if you're up to it, Sue, or if you're able. And also, just my understanding, just because people who are listening to this who hear the word ethnomathematics, that could be. I mean, like you try throwing that out there the next time you're at a store. People look like you're crazy. And so, really, the way I have learned in Arthur's book, what ethnomathematics is the easiest way to think about it. It's like the way people do math at home, in the workplace, and in their culture. And here's the thing: mathematics professors have a culture themselves. So
Mhm.
ethnomathematics is really doing math in your space, in your place, and
Mhm.
in other
Mhm.
places. And I think
Mhm.
that's a real tie between these two. Is that
Mhm.
is there something you could add to that, Arthur? Or?
No, in fact, I'm very happy that you brought up the idea that, even within among mathematicians, that they have a culture, a way of thinking, a way of doing things, which constitutes an ethnomathematics.
Mhm,
So that ethnomathematics isn't just something exotic, but rather can be professionalized,
mhm.
as professional mathematicians have done.
Yes, it's more than just I count by 20s. That I
Right.
usually use 20 or base 27 or whatever you. Sue, yes, I'm sorry you were coming off mute right before I interrupted you.
That's okay. No, that's okay. Like Brea and Jenny mentioned early on, I also had only been familiar with the windows and the mirrors. And this idea of sliding doors is so beautiful. I think all of it is very beautiful and very inviting and has the potential, when we apply it to teaching, to make more people feel welcome in the space.
Mhm,
Each of those analogies. But to Arthur's sort of point and transition to pedagogy, one place that we can look as teachers with these analogies is, excuse me, to think about storytelling.
mhm,
So if we think about any culture, any period in time, any period in history, any way of living our lives, we're rich with stories that are innately mathematical. And so I think there's a real opportunity to look around your immediate surroundings, look around those that are in front of you as students, and to look within yourself to find those stories that are innately mathematical, to invite more people into the conversation, and to use those stories within our teaching, within our classrooms. So
mhm.
that's kind of where I was thinking.
Yeah, story as a context, and now we have a metaphor to place that context. What is each one of these things? And I know Steve is off camera, so he's not on my screen. But welcome, Steve. I appreciate you joining us. We're just getting started with this. Um, so before we talk about the pedagogy, because there were a couple of things that I wanted to point or ask and hear. The original metaphor, sort of me, feels unidirectional. You start with mirrors, you go to windows, and then do sliding glass doors. And I guess you're done. I'm not sure. I mean, it's a literature metaphor, right? And so we're sort of pushing it for math ed. But how do you all see that? Was that something you picked up as well?
I had an aha as I read
Mhm.
because, okay, pairing with this idea of the flashlight,
Mhm.
that it's whether you're indoors or outdoors. And so the mirrors are typically indoors.
Mhm.
And if you're looking out a window, you're also still indoors. And so the sliding door allows you to go out into the world of mathematics, into the world of, you know, whatever the country is, whatever the experiences. And so that is such a beautiful, to me, connection to, like, are you inside, whether you're looking at yourself or looking out, or are you actually going out and like being a part of this other world. So this was like a big, exciting thing for me about pushing us harder, further
Hmm.
in opening up the world to our students and having them out in that world, not just like viewing it from the window.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I think in this article I wrote, the window is for looking, doorways are for walking through. That's sort of what you're articulating because that feels much more immersive. Um, but then when I teach a lesson, it's hard to stop at a window anyway. I would want the kids to be involved. What were you going to say, Jenny Moore?
Yeah, so just building off of that, I read a book a long time ago and it was about risk taking.
Mm,
And it's about standing at your circle of comfort. And if you're at the rim of that circle and something is uncomfortable, if you step back, your circle of comfort becomes smaller. And if you step out over that circle, then your circle of comfort becomes bigger. So I made a connection to this doorway thing. So you're standing at the doorway and you're deciding whether you're ready to like step out into that world, which is so important in math. Like oh, I don't know, I'm not good at math. I don't want to do that. I don't feel comfortable being out there doing this thing. And so thinking about this sliding glass door is standing at this sill or whatever it's called in a doorway and deciding, am I going to step out into this world and experience it, or am I going to step back away into my own comfort zone?
mhm,
So for math, that's about the risk taking that's so important and figuring stuff out. Like, I'm going to try a different way. I'm going to be open to this new thing. I'm going to try this new challenge. So the sliding glass door to me is really powerful in thinking about empowering students to get out there, to put themselves out there.
mhm, mhm. Yeah. Anyone else have something you want to add to that idea? Yeah, Brea.
I do, and I want to build on what Jenny was just mentioning about empowerment. And when I read your the article, and you talked about the teacher holding the flashlight and mathematics being in the dark,
Mhm.
and I thought about how what we're really doing is we're empowering students to do all of these great things. Should we not also empower them to hold the flashlight?
Yes.
And I don't know, because we talk about that agency, right? And so they have the agency through the the construct of the mirrors and the windows and the sliding doors and even the pillars. But is who is the person who has the mathematical authority?
Hmm.
Because if we just keep it at the teacher having the flashlight, then it still comes back to me, right?
Hmm.
So that was something I thought about as I read.
Okay. At the risk
Yeah.
of over participating, Brie, I was thinking the same thing. And by the time they go through the glass doorway, they're outside and there's natural lighting.
Hmm.
There's the,
Mm-hmm.
world of the natural light. Nobody's holding the flashlight because the whole world is there, lit
Mm,
by the sun, and then we can see all that is there to offer in, metaphorically, but realistically in the world of mathematics. Like, you've joined out there to this risk-taking, multicultural, who knows what you're going to discover world.
mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah. And so I love this one thing I love about these kinds of things. When you're able to listen to people, you think, oh, I've come so far and I've progressed this thing by giving students agency. They decide when to look out the window. They decide when to look at the door. And Ree's going, how about we give them the flashlight? That's good, Bria. I love it. Just like, let's push it a little further. And I think I want to play off of that because then this comes back to the pedagogy to me, Arthur. What's the role of the teacher then? When I got my PhD, the first classes I taught, I was like, here's an activity. This is student centered. You're the students. Let me know when you get the idea. That's not what we're talking about. So what is the pedagogy in this space? And we can look at each of these and then we'll talk about pillars later.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is the question of pedagogy sort of really does loom when you think about, okay, do you give the students the flashlight? Do they take the flashlight? Um, what happens when they walk out through the sliding door and world is lit by the sun. And so where they can draw their attention is different because they can make that decision because there isn't a light that is drawing their attention and saying, this is what you need to attend to. And so it does raise lots of interesting questions around uh, who has the power, who has the agency, what kinds of mathematical ideas are students wanting to explore, what kinds of mathematical objects and relationships are they finding, how do they talk about these objects and relationships with each other, are they constrained by sort of external forces that say, okay, well, here is the curriculum and here is what's going to be expected of you to be able to perform for some national or statewide tests. What role does a teacher play in helping students to understand the brilliance that they have and how they can use that brilliance to approach the mathematics? There are lots of these kinds of questions, I think, that are looming in this in our discussion of the metaphor. And one has to make certain kinds of decisions. They're not just instructional decisions, they're also political decisions, right? Does the teacher act in a creative,
And mine was
insubordinate
really long,
way
but then it
in
took
order to
20
provide
minutes for
to
them to put this
students?
together.
I think we hear
Yeah, right.
Steve's voice. In order to provide to students access to mathematics, which may not be the mathematics which has been determined that they should have access to at that particular moment in their grade and school year.
So, Arthur, you've just introduced a lot of really interesting questions there that we want to touch on. And I mean, one of the things I thought of initially, just in that line is, isn't the metaphor in some ways giving some students the agencies because, or letting them define the math? I mean, on the one hand, they're saying, I'm the mathematician. Now, how am I a mathematician interacting in a bigger world? Oh, let me go explore that. Oh, I learned something. Let me take it back and see what that looks like in my space. But then and this is especially the case for the teachers that'll be listening to this. They have objectives that they have to hit. And honestly, if they don't hit those objectives, bad things can happen for them. They have to, so they're in a world where others define what they need to know. How do we, and Brea, this is the thing you pointed, how do we provide agency in that space where someone else is saying, here's the math? That's a question that I wonder.
You know, one word that I keep hearing used a lot is the word decision, that there are decisions to be made. So, by the person that might be on the doorway into this beautiful lit world outside, but also a teacher who needs to make decisions. I think to start answering that question, the role of choice is really critical. So if you're an educator and you've got a particular set of objectives and particular parts of mathematics that you need to make sure you teach to your students, are there opportunities for choice in there in some way, in the way that it's explored, in the way that a child would express what they know, in a way that they're going to engage with the mathematics? I think a key move that aligns with this framework in the service of agency and empowerment is certainly the role of choice, and a teacher understanding how to offer up those choices in alignment with the objectives that they're being asked to teach.
Okay, that's good. So what do we do then when the teachers themselves don't maybe know exactly what they're supposed to be teaching? They know the objectives, but maybe the math itself, they don't have a really fluid, dynamic knowledge of that and understanding of it. And I mean, this happens, we see it in our country a lot too. Teachers lecture because that's what they were told. That is their worldview. When we say teach differently, we're literally breaking apart their worldview and saying, try something new. And I know that's the case I mean, I've seen it in the jungle of Ecuador and in the mountains of Guatemala, and we all saw it in remote Nepal. Um, so how do we help the teachers get to that point while letting the students progress?
Well, using the trip to Guatemala this summer, I think, as an example of that, this takes the framework and shifts it to, I think, teacher education.
Mhm.
So, what we experienced through our professional learning was that teachers who were, we'll say, concerned about using more conceptual materials and tools in their mathematics instruction through the professional learning had at first a window just to see what does this really look like? Why could this be a better option than my just teaching all the formulas and having students to memorize these ideas? And I think because of the environment that we created as educators, it created a sliding door. So it didn't take, I think it was, who was it? I think it was Saul, who was leading our professional development. It didn't take him saying, you must do this in your classroom. But the example, the trust that had been established amongst educators, it led to people just saying, I'm going to try this in multiple classrooms. And they're trying it, then led them to say, oh, let me just continue to do this new thing. Right. So I think what you're really talking about are professional learning experiences that allow us as mathematics teachers to have that vulnerability, to be willing to learn and to explore mathematics teaching in ways that maybe we're not as familiar with, or be able to share with others some things that we are, so that it broadens our perspectives and our worldview.
So that's almost taking the metaphor to the professional development area. And I appreciate you saying that. Abby, who was on the trip with you too, has thought about that. How can we write about this model in the professional development world? Um, yeah. For students, so the one reason I wrote this article was because I felt like, I mean, I've heard the criticism, especially coming from a statistics program, well, that's all wonderful that kids see themselves as in the mathematics and they experience real world mathematics, but sometimes you just have to do the basic structures of math, and I might not understand the connection right now, but I have to know defined the patterns of perfect squares because there's some beauty in that, and I'll learn some sort of mathematical number sense. And honestly, in this mirrors, windows, sliding glass doors, I don't even see space for number talks. That's not one of those things. And that's sort of what I'm thinking. So what do you think about that idea? Where does that fit? Or does the pillar add to that? Yes, Arthur, go ahead.
Well, I was actually going to request that you sort of talk a little bit more about the pillar, because I
Mhm.
find that could use a little more elaboration.
Yeah, so in the article I was writing about, and as I think about this, I feel like we talk a lot about making the real world connections. We want students to experience the math themselves. There are times maybe that we have to have someone who can build the fundamental structures on which we do these real world connections. And sometimes we have to learn those structures even before we see the real world connection. Um, Hopefully it's rare. Or sometimes just meaning to go, let's take this idea and see if I could find the numbers and the math and the function that happens in it, so that I can apply it. I think in a lot of ways, people discovered mathematics in the real world, and then they wanted to articulate what they were doing, and they thought, hey, if I can articulate what I did, you can apply it to whatever thing. And we've taken that as the thing we do to teach. We go, hey, here's the general rule. Now you figure out how to apply it. And that's a little overwhelming. We almost start with the pillar in a classroom. And so for
Yeah.
me, the pillar is pushing this to the just pure doing math step,
Yeah.
because sometimes we might have to just do math, but that doesn't happen unless one, the teachers, the students trust that there's a reason they're doing this, and that
Hmm.
that will
Hmm.
happen if they've been doing real world situations. And then
Hmm.
secondly, the students have to believe that they have a voice, that they
Mhm.
have
Mhm.
agency, that nothing will be learned unless they actually do the thinking
Mhm.
themselves.
Mhm.
And if that happens, then I think students are willing to engage
Mhm.
enthusiastically. You see them,
Mhm.
right? How many times do kids love doing math puzzles that has
Mhm.
no window, sliding glass door, or mirror, but it's an
Mhm.
engaging puzzle.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. I I mean, I think doing puzzles can be either mirror or window, but
Oh, okay.
um, getting back to the pillars metaphor, I'm reminded of the work of Dave Hewitt, an English mathematics educator, who wrote very powerfully, I think, about what he considers to be ways, two categories of mathematics curriculum. And
Mm,
that is one which is what he calls arbitrary. That is, there are those things in the mathematics curriculum which aren't inventable. That is, they're handed down historically.
mm,
So in English, the way we name numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, the students aren't going to invent that. That those labels come to us historically. Or the Cartesian plane, the fact that we have an XY axis. That's a kind of arbitrary tool that was invented, and it's unlikely that students are going to come up with that particular tool themselves. So um, for Hewitt, things that are arbitrary are things that are the pillars that need to be told
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
because, as I say, they're historical. They're heritage. They're things that are handed down. However, there's aspects of the curriculum which are what he calls necessary. They're kind of logically necessary. They're things that are discoverable. There are ways of crafting tasks or activities so that students engaging in those tasks will come to discover um, the commutative law, for example, of addition, or will come to discover different principles of combinatorics because of the way in which they're engaging with those tasks. And so for Hewitt, what's arbitrary needs to be given. What's necessary, we need to find ways of designing tasks that engages students so that they can come up with and discover those ideas on their own or through dialogue, collaboration with other students.
mm-hmm. So that's a pedagogical strategy. What are your thoughts about that? Anyone have ideas or have some things that I'm thinking about? Steve, you're
I'm
on mute.
making,
Yeah, go ahead, Jenny. Jenny, you start, and then Steve. Go ahead.
I'm thinking about properties
Hmm.
and place value. So if we think about computation and we think about this whole construct, windows, mirrors, sliding doors, and pillars, it also applies if you're just adding. It isn't just about like it it is important to have the cultural storytelling and all that sort of thing, but it's also true if you're just adding. So I think about like 48 plus 49.
Hmm.
And so you're thinking, instead of saying, here's how we're going to solve that and telling students how to do it, then you're saying, how might you add these numbers? What are your options? What do you like? Well, that's the sort of the me in it, right? The mirror. Like, I think I would like to add the tens and add the ones. Ooh, I think I would like to change those numbers up and then fix them later. So there's different ways they might think about that. And then as different students are sharing their ideas, that's the window. Another student's listening to a student and they're like, oh, I kind of like their way of thinking. And then eventually they're understanding these pillars of place value, that you have these places and what that means, and these properties that you can like move numbers around and, add them in different ways and all these sort of things. And now they're empowered so they can walk through the sliding glass door and just join the world of, fluent math doers that see a problem like 48 plus 49 and don't feel constrained that there's one way to do it, but they can do it in a way that, fits them as a person, because they've learned about it in community. So I'm thinking about, I just thought of a very basic example as I was listening to Arthur about these properties are something that can be discovered and explored and understood. And that gives that agency that like Brea was talking about to like be in the, to be outdoors doing the math with, in a way that is meaningful.
I
Yeah,
want to follow up on that if I could.
please do.
I'm sorry that I'm late. That's not worth explaining why. But I think that the word that Arthur used, and I suspect others have, is engage. I think we talk a lot about to engage, to grab, to give kids a reason to care, to have kids feel like they belong. All of that are aspects of engaging, but it's easy to talk about. We see a whole lot of kids that are not engaged. And where I find this metaphor to be really valuable is the first place you engage is when you see yourself. And so I start with a context. Yes, Jenny, you're absolutely right. We can do it with 45 plus 35 and all that stuff. But I prefer to show them a can where the price is 35 cents and 45 cents as the lead in so that, oh, I know what's going on here. The whole notion of what do you notice is embedded in this idea of reflecting what you see and then what do you notice when it's a window and you're sort of seeing outside of yourself. Those are incredibly powerful ways to have kids to care. Once they care, once they're engaged, it's amazing what they will tolerate us doing with them, to them, for them. And that's where the idea of the door, okay, fine. So that's cool. And you see yourself and you see this, and this context makes sense to you and you can relate to it. Now, let's sort of surface on some mathematics. Let's sort of see about what you might do with that. I think we spend far too much time telling kids, asking kids the question, as opposed to asking the kids, so what's the question? What might you want to know? What do you wonder about? And then that transition from that engagement around the question and the mathematics, I think, leads directly to pillars. And, I wrote at one point in all of this stuff that it strikes me that pillars is where we get at the structure of math. You don't ever start with that, although we try and do that in our textbooks and in our instruction. But the pillars are when you put pieces together, when you make connections, when you try and generalize. And that's why I've been so captivated by this four-stage metaphor. I also think that it's so perfect for reading because we forget that there's reading and then there's literature. This was designed for reading and reading and giving kids a reason to care about reading. We know that reading as a skill, literature as a use of that skill or an application is all mushed together in mathematics. And so that's one of the reason why I really like extending this beyond just the door into the idea of pillars, because it says to teachers, there's something important at each of those stages, and they build on one another. And the first two really are the grab in order to have kids care, at which point they might be interested in doing some math, at which point we can step back and say, so what happened here? How are they the same? How are they different? And that's the way in which I've been drawn into the power of this.
Thank you, Steve. Yes, and I saw Arthur. Maybe you were going to say something. Maybe not. I'm watching like an auction ear, so I'm like, if I see a movement, I'm going to call on you. But what I want to say is, Jenny, when you were talking about the sort of number sense discussion that you were having there, related to modeling, I was thinking, well, isn't that a pillar? Aren't we just doing math? But then I loved how you were like, yes, but when doing math, I find myself in it. Then I can listen to others, and so in some ways fundamentally we are building one of these structural things. What is that pillar there that you're talking about? And honestly, we like I sometimes will say, okay, I want to see like a proof of it. I want you to explain it to me in such a way that I can understand the numbers, even though of course I know. um, that's a pillar that you're asking the kids to build, but you're saying we're starting from something. And fundamentally, this is the thing, Steve is pointing to this idea that we want to see the kids engage to me when they are doing something that's meaningful to them. Um, yeah.
And just adding on to that, I feel like this is that whole idea of flipping the I do, we do, you do approach completely around, right? So
Mm, mm.
at we end with the teacher concluding based on that whole discovery, that whole discussion, everything that happened. We sort of conclude with that instead of starting with that. So I wonder if there's, that's sort of where that pillar is coming in, is after, so that we've already stepped through the door, we've already had that invitation in, we've got some agency, and then we're drawing that conclusion. Whereas traditional instruction would start with it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I often say to the teachers, I mean, this is easier sometimes working in some of the places we do, is pretend you don't really know what you're teaching that day. You know what you're going to teach tomorrow and why the kids need to know. You know what they're supposed to know before, but you can rebuild it with the students. And then you could say, well, based on what you did, here's what I got. But Brea, back to the very beginning, I want to call on you because I want you to, like, to me, that is still the teacher defining what the math is. Um, so where is that line? Because, we look, teaching math is very difficult. It also, everyone teaches. This is this great paradox, I think, that I find in our work. You can all be great teachers, but it's really hard, but also you can do it. Um, so where does that agency come and who defines that math?
Well, I think what you're saying and what I'm seeing is that the pillars are just as contextual as all the other parts of this particular or of the constructs, right? So if I am deciding what the underlying structures need to be in order for my students to formalize and generalize mathematics, that's going to be a little different from what they decide. It may be even different from what's decided what structures are used to formalize mathematics in their communities or in other mathematical communities. The structures used in elementary may be different from the structure used in middle school. So I think um, for me right now, it's difficult to say what what should a teacher do to establish a pillar other than to say it's important just to recognize that you're going to need to be flexible, as you said, because these aren't fixed. And it's really still contextually based. When I think about number talks, for example, um, number talks are important routines that I see really being used or useful across the spectrum of kindergarten through 12th grade or pre-K, really, through 12th grade in different ways. But I don't know. I feel like the way that they are used, the way that teachers understand them, all of that really depends on the different contexts. So
Hmm, interesting. Yeah, that's I mean it's I'm caught with this because like if I go to the doctor with a broken arm, I'm not going to expect the doctor to go, well, what do you think is happening? I know you feel this but I want to hear I want to know a little bit about the direction. Of course, I want to be able to say, why do this, this, and this, and I don't want to not be able to do that. So that's individual, but there's some expertise that has to be part of that. And I don't quite know what that teacher role is and what the teacher's expertise is. One thing I like about the revised version of this is the way I really have always seen it as well. The teacher goes, oh, today we're going to do a mirror activity. And then I think we often say, do window activities. And then we go, good luck with that. And we don't really offer good window activities. I mean, what's a sliding glass door really look like? Give me a sliding glass door task and how's that different? But in reality, I think it's a little bit of both. And you sort of can maybe do all in one class period. This is much more of a deeper dive. But yeah, I still would love to understand like what is that nuance between the teacher expertise in guiding the class and the students having their own voice. Ooh, that's a good picture of your ear, Steve. For a second. Okay, yeah. So any ideas about that? Like, can we say more about what that teacher expertise is and what that looks like?
I mean, I think it's a bit of a balancing act, So you're talking about you go to a doctor with a broken arm, you need some expertise there. So it's kind of learning how to be the coach, the facilitator, the guide, you sort of know you've got the landscape, right? You've got that. So you're trying to enter into an understanding of that student's background, their interests, their culture, their perspective, getting into engagement that Steve talked about. And then you're trying to steer and guide things in a particular direction. But I still think choice is a critical aspect of it so that we can hold on to that agency. So maybe I have an idea of where I want this to end, but I'm going to build from where you begin, and I'm going to give you choice on how we get there.
Okay. What do you guys think about that?
Well, choice and agency go hand in hand, right? And so I feel like where we've gone awry with math is removing all the choice. We think we're helping students when we're like, this problem, do it this way, this problem, do it that way, this problem, do it that way. And so students are trying to keep track of all these things that they've been shown. And if instead they have the opportunity to choose how they're going to navigate the problem, then they have that opportunity to develop agency, and the teacher supports that when they say, what strategy might you use to solve this problem? Why did you choose that method? Which method do you like and why? That's the personalizing of it. And like honoring, let's say Brea has a strategy and that goes well. And students are like, I like Brea's way because why? Well, because it made sense. It was not very many steps to get to the answer. It was like awesome. And then Brea is now stepping out of the sliding glass doors to like be part of the math community. And so it is about like opening up the teachers guiding that conversation to bring attention to some ideas that are worthy of consideration. But the students are generating ideas about how to navigate whatever the problem is.
So it seems to me the challenge is that we need to come up with some models, some examples. This all is at a very high level, and we talk about kids learn starting at a concrete level, obviously, with examples and pictures. And I think we need to, take a mathematical situation, a context, some data, and run through the kinds of questions we could ask that show what it means to engage kids thinking about this as a mirror. I mean, what do you notice? How can you relate to this? Where have you seen this before? And then take it the next step and shift the context a little and open the window so that people actually can make sense of how these four stages play out. And I go back and I think that it's our questions that are what engages the kids. It's the teacher control, but giving the kids voice.
Mm-hmm.
So Chad, there we go. You can have AI, Chad using chat to sort of do an example, send it to us, we'll fix it up, and we'll create a couple.
Yeah, I think that's
Oh yeah,
the
I
key.
was just going to say that we should take up Steve's challenge and come up with a couple of examples where we show how this example can be used in each of the categories of this.
Right. Well, so let's thinking about what an example could be, Jenny, I think one thing you have done for me and opened my eyes, you and Brea really helped me see that this is more than just culture in the classroom, and it could be just me having a voice in this, could be pure mathematical thing. My original model was sliding glass doors and then just plain doing math. And Jenny and I think Arthur helped wisely remind me and Steve actually also had up this point that doesn't really fit the metaphor. It's like structural doing something. That's where the pillars will lie. I think that fits well. I always see this as more culture. I see myself in I see my culture in the math I'm doing. I want to do the math of other people. And Steve, your phone is getting a lot of feedback here. You may want to mute it.
Yeah, that's my problem. I'll take care of it.
Okay, thanks.
Mute your
Then,
phone.
but it's the cultural thing. But then if we just stop at the culture, I think that's where I have experienced people sort of being critical, like, oh, you're just doing soft, fuzzy math. And that's not true. It's rigorous all along. But I think if we start to talk about how we build it, But what would that look like? It's like how would an activity, can we build one now? I mean, I'm like literally with legends in the field. So you guys should let's see how good we are. Like if we started with an activity, could be just like, I don't know, what do you guys want to do? How do we want to start it? Can we start one? Arthur thought of this. So Arthur, you kick us off. It's your idea.
Yeah,
Mirror
it
look
was
like.
my idea, but give me a moment to think about what would be a good example that could show mirror, window, sliding door, and pillar.
Hmm.
Um,
I have one.
No pressure, by the way.
Oh, no, Brea, you
yeah, no,
unmuted. Maybe it's on you now.
No, I was I was
I have
sweating
one
in
I
my
can
seat for
do.
a moment. I thought, oh, okay. Um,
I have one I can
Could
do.
I share,
Yes.
could I share an
please.
example? I don't know if this will work in the way that I'll give Arthur some think time here, but one of the things that I love about Ecuador is that I met the mango when I was in
Mhm.
Ecuador, my favorite fruit.
Mhm.
And so now I live in the world of basic facts. And so one of the tasks that I've developed that I shared at the Mathkind you know, at this thing a year or so ago was this idea that you have a bowl full of mangoes and then you have some more mangoes on the table. And so like, let's say there's 9 mangoes in the bowl and then there's some more mangoes on the table. Let's say there's 5. So there's 9 in the bowl, 5 on the table. And you're asking students, how many mangoes do I have? And so they could think about it a couple of ways. They could pretend there's 10 in the bowl, add it, and then remember that they imagine one extra, so they remove one extra. Or they could pick a mango up off the table and put it in the bowl. So these are 2 of the classic important place value strategies for adding 9 plus 6, say. To think of it as 10 plus 6 and then fix the answer, or move one over the making 10 strategy and think of it as 10 plus 5. So in adding that context that makes sense, it gives students a chance to picture their own tables, their own consumption, their own like lives and relate to that. But then this is a pillar that they're learning around properties of number. And then as they feel like, ooh, hey, I don't really like, I'm going to change the problem now. 8 plus 5, but could I picture this bowl with 8 and this table of 5 and put 2, oh, now that's 10 plus 3. Like they're now equipped with this idea that you can move some over to make a 10. Maybe that's, a pillar in the world of, the beginnings of addition fluency. And that allows them to navigate that space and to be able to think of other ways to solve it. So to me, like there's this opportunity for them to see them to reason, which is themselves in the math. They're coming up with an idea of their own. It's in a story that relates to them to allow them to see the idea that they're coming up with. And as students are sharing their other ways of moving those mangoes around or thinking about those mangoes, they're looking out the window to other ways of doing the thinking.
Mhm.
It's just a very simple example, but I just, my work is in fluency and starting with basic facts. And I feel like this metaphor matters even at this very small computational beginnings, not just for like big math, of course, for big math, but even at this very tiny beginning, this metaphor helps us think about how to navigate that space.
Yeah, and I love that Jenny goes straight to a number sense thing. Good idea, Jenny. That's there you go, right on brand, and I love that. And also, so you're also like there are 2
Jenny,
levels.
I thought you were going to then tell us about the sliding door.
Yeah. Well,
So
can
the
I,
sliding
go ahead.
door, right? So the sliding door. So now, Arthur, there's a new problem. There's a much bigger bowl and there's like 28 mangoes in it. And you got more mangoes on the table. Maybe there's 8 mangoes on the table. And the question is, could you use that idea? Like, are you ready to walk out the door and like put your own like ideas onto solving this problem? Or are you expecting the teacher to tell you what to do now? that there's so many more mangoes in the bowl. So I feel like once they have this windows and mirror thing, they've heard how other people think about it. They see how they think about it. They're feeling like this strategy is making sense. This pillar of making it 10, this is a big idea using our, place value and properties. So they're like, oh no, I got this. I'm going to go on out. So I'm going to slide that door open. I'm going to go on out there. I can solve 19 plus 8 without like guidance. I can, just still put a mango in the bowl. Now there's 20 mangoes in the bowl and 7 on the table or whatever it is. I can solve this. Like I've got this general idea, the pillar. So now I'm happy to go outside that sliding glass door and take on new challenges. Does that work, Arthur? Are you buying it?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I'm thinking of, inviting students to use others' strategy for solving the problem as a kind of going through the sliding door. Having heard, the different strategies that were shared, and now they're using not their own, but someone else's.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jenny, I love that you're thinking about this on a real process level, almost like, well, what's the experience of the individual student and how are they processing and where does this knowledge come from, and then how do I listen to others? And I've really always thought of this as really cultural almost, or contextual. Like the first activity is about my space. The second one might be for me to look at the space of others. The third might be actually to do something, that sliding glass door. I'm still not quite sure I can distinguish the difference between a window and a sliding glass door officially. The pillar is easy to think about. And, I think you allude to it. And I love when you describe it, it truly is dynamic. I might go and do this, and here I'm going to build my pillar a little bit, and then I'm going to do something else and come back and explore different things from different perspectives, which is what was important to me in this revision, is that agency. Brea, she's got, hold on, Brea's got the answer. Okay, Brea.
No. Well, okay, I was thinking about really two things. The first was understanding that it doesn't necessarily need to be like this linear trajectory of mirror window sliding door. Am I correct?
Mm-hmm. That's
Okay.
what I think personally.
Okay. And then, so my other thought was about how we're talking really a lot about identity work as well.
Mm.
So, and how that connects to the agency.
But teachers will be listening to this. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by, like, we're talking about identity? What are we talking about?
Oh, so that is a very broad term, right? So I could be talking about like having a very positive mathematics identity.
Okay.
Do I believe that I can solve problems? Do I believe that the mathematics, as I understand it, is meaningful? Am I talking about identity, like my cultural identity, the identity of my school, my classroom, my family, my community?
Mhm.
And from the way I understood what you'd written, you're really looking at all of the various types of identity
Mhm.
in this. So the example I thought about was one that we used this summer in Guatemala. And I think it may start in a different place. So we looked at alfombras, which alfombras are a design that are created during like Holy Week in different
Mhm.
cities.
Mhm.
And they'll generally be a combination of very beautiful geometric shapes, a lot of the decorations in Alfombras that they're created on the ground, I think out of a sand type material.
Or flowers.
Or flowers. And so the artist will create these to just represent their culture and represent what they believe and celebrate their faith. So as we were doing a lesson on area and perimeter, we co-taught a lesson on asking the students to create an Alfombra that had a certain measurement. I think this had to have a certain area, and using square tiles to create their designs, but also being mindful that we didn't say that this had to be a rectangular design. We didn't say that it needed to take a specific geometric shape, but utilizing their personal experience with having created and or seen Alfombras. Then they designed and then compared and looked at one another's Alfombras and then taught their parents at the mathematics festival what it would look like or how they could create different alfombras that way. So I wondered if that was first a mirror, because we were talking about concepts of area and perimeter of mostly two-dimensional shapes, but relating it to the Guatemalan culture. I
Mhm.
feel like it's a sliding door because it allowed them to step into creating and constructing some geometrical ideas, or yeah, developing these geometrical ideas um, without the constraints of us saying that it had to be this way. We provided some criteria, but it was still very much their own. And then the window, I think, would be connecting it back to some other representations. We won't say that formulas are the main way, right, to represent area and perimeter. It is a mathematical, symbolic, there are symbolic representations for representing area and perimeter. And so I think, might be a window into saying, let's look at some other ways that these ideas can be represented symbolically,
Mhm.
and or using other representations. But the pillar that I thought about was actually the mathematical discourse
Mhm.
that took place as we were going through all of those activities, right? So it wasn't just the teacher to peer or student discourse. There was a lot of presentations that took place peer to peer. There were the peer to parent, or
Mhm.
peer to younger student, I guess sibling to sibling, when they were at the math festival demonstrating what they had done. So I don't know if that kind of fits into how you might have been thinking about.
I think it's a great starting point, and I love that you're thinking about, because what is a window to me is a mirror to the people.
Right,
Every one of those
right.
students, I learned them. They're the carpets that you see. If you Google, for those of you watching, if you Google Guatemala Holy Week carpets, you'll see these. They're just remarkable, and just it's a huge statement. And to me, that's the mirror. And I don't know, to me, a window might even also be, well, here are ways people solve problems about area in other parts of the world. It could be a garden in Europe or Africa. Um, and now people are thinking about that garden. And then I don't quite see that step to the walking through the door into that, other than maybe to do a pretend garden or plant a pretend garden, and then seeing how I can represent that garden in one of these Clumbras. Um, Defining the math that I do. Oh, of course, there's the area formula, but then there's how do I decide each one of these fractions, and what's not corn if I make a garden. That to me is also the pillar, because that pillar applies to all these areas. Now I'm going to bring the pillar, that knowledge that I have from the garden, back into my culture and go, oh, next Holy Week, it's going to look a little different because I've learned these new things. Um, I think those also, but I'm thinking more of the concrete, and you and Jenny are talking process too. And I think those are two levels of this that I hadn't even thought about, that provide some really interesting opportunities. So Arthur, you become the arbitrator. What do you think about these
Well,
things? Yeah.
yeah, I like them both. And I also like the distinction that you've just made. Um, I'm also thinking about um, for teachers, the idea that they engage students in some kind of problem solving activity
Mhm.
where students are working either in groups or individually, and they see how they themselves work to solve the problem, and
Mhm.
they're able to articulate their process as
Mhm.
a kind of mirror activity.
Mhm.
And then when the class comes together and discusses the variety of ways in which people solve the problem, um, and they listen carefully to each other, and that becomes part of how the teacher orchestrates the discussion, that they're um, at the window, hearing and learning about these different solutions, these different ways of approaching the problem. And then when later invited to take up a way of solving a problem which isn't their own, but one that they've heard from their classmate, that's a kind of sliding door activity.
Mm-hmm.
And that
Mm.
this becomes an important, even pedagogical way of thinking about how one can organize lessons so that there's this rich exchange of ideas
Mm-hmm.
that students engage with, and not just exchange these ideas, but then have the opportunity to actually implement
Mm-hmm.
the idea of someone else's
Mm-hmm.
to the point that they really understand that other approach,
Mm-hmm.
and how that can be a way of really being a very powerful way of learning the mathematics, because they're learning it from different perspectives.
Mm-hmm. Which is the fundamental aspect of this, is to learn that different
Yeah,
perspectives.
right.
Well, we have about 15 minutes left and or less, and what I want to do is sort of wrap with something that I think I've learned from Steve, and you guys probably do this a lot anyway. But I would love to think about what's the role of the student and the role of the teacher in these situations. And I would like to preface it or start this off by saying I believe in a traditional classroom, we start with pillars. We just throw pillars at the kids and go, you guys put everything else together. That's that sort of flashlight idea. Here's a thing, here's a thing, here's a thing. Don't worry about how they're connected. You can figure that out later. That's the traditional classroom. We all understand where it comes from and, what have you. And we could talk about that for an hour and a half. But what's the role of the teacher and the student here in these situations?
Well,
I'd
when you
like,
say what's the role of the teacher and the student,
Yeah.
I mean, let me see if I understand what you're asking. I mean, are you asking to to distinguish between this way of, putting the pillar first, what the role of the teacher and student is,
Well, so
or
yeah,
are you asking, yeah,
yeah.
mhm,
So in the, certainly in a traditional classroom, the role of the teacher is to provide the knowledge. And I think even in the metaphor in the literature version, it's the teacher's role to provide this activity and provide this activity. Um,
mhm,
and and the way we are talking about this is certainly when we think about the process, the role of the teacher and the students might be different. And sometimes what I have found is to me, what we're talking, this is a pretty high level conversation. To me, I'm like barely hanging on. You guys are so intellectual and smart with this. And I also want to make this really accessible for teachers. And I'm thinking sometimes as a teacher, I just go, well, so what do I do? And that's what I want to know. What do I do, the teacher? What do I expect from my students? And Jenny, I saw you unmute. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
mhm,
so two things. First of all, I think it's a shift away from this is how you do this to how might you do this? You're putting the person in the math. So to me, that's a very simple yet dramatic shift in how math is typically taught. And it positions the student as the designer of how to solve the problem with the expert guidance of the teacher. So that's my first thing. My second thing
But can I
is,
pause for a sec? So let me understand that because you said it's a shift from saying this is how you do this to this, how might you do this? So you're
right,
saying, I'm not going to tell you as the teacher how to do this. I want to hear what you have to say.
right. And might is an invitation. It's an invitation to open up that door and head on out there and try something. And so from that exploration, then there's success, and then there's confidence, and there's competence, and there's this generalizing. So to me, the pillar idea is that they're generalizing a big mathematical construct that further empowers them to be able to do other math at other times. So it's that invitation to do the math.
Mhm,
So how might you solve this instead of here's how you solve it is
mhm,
inviting them into being the doer of the math.
mhm,
So that's to me at the core of the shift. And then the other thing is Chad said I'm on brand
mhm,
because I've been on an all out tireless journey to help people see that fluency, basic fact fluency, fluency in general is also part of cultural practice,
Mm.
not something that is
Mm.
told to students, something that can be understood and generative. So while I agree that it's beautiful when there's cultural context to bring in and explorations that are just culturally relevant, that's the epitome of what we're trying to do. That there's days when you're just in the muck of dealing with the numbers away from the context, the stories. And even in those moments, these metaphors matter
Mhm.
as we think about how to empower the students to be the doers of the math instead of having them watch and mimic the teacher doing the mathematics
Yeah, or even other people, other students.
or other people, right?
Right. And when you talk about number sense and just that's such a part of your culture and what you do. I think about Teresina Nunez's street mathematics, school
A
mathematics.
hundred
Uh,
percent, a
that's
hundred percent, right?
perfect illustration of some brilliant math. And we've experienced that in Guatemala. And I want to get into that story now, but that's wonderful. Thank you. Brea.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that and say I agree because it seems like both when you're thinking about the work that's been done with numeracy and you're thinking about what you presented here with your construct, it's still about making sure that children are pursuing mathematical questions.
Mhm.
And that can be, I think sometimes we do underestimate the simplicity of a notice and a wonder because that's still strong mathematical thinking that's valuable. And so we're I see having mirrors and windows, sliding doors, and pillars as just being a framework for setting up um, our students to be able to explore the world in mathematical lenses.
Mm.
And so I think that whether it is through that really more, I want to say deeper, but the identity work that may be more connected to their culture and community outside of the classroom, there's still a lot of culturally mathematically based work that's happening inside the classroom
Mhm.
as well. But the goal is still the same. We want them to make mathematical observations. We want them to observe the world from that way. And we want them to be able to be the ones that are part of sharing the authority and knowing that they too can ask questions that they can answer.
Mhm. Mhm. That's great. Yep, I like that. Arthur, can you add anything? What's this? I have some things I'm thinking about.
Well, it is interesting that we've come around to now really talking about pedagogy.
Yeah.
um, because that's the heart of things. How are we going to implement this? How
Mhm.
and what is the role of the teacher? What's the role of the student? Um, I want to reiterate that part of the role of the teacher is to be clear about what's arbitrary and what's necessary,
Mhm.
to know what of the content is needs to be told to students,
Mhm.
and whatever is necessary, that one finds ways of creating tasks that help students to reinvent, to rediscover those ideas for themselves.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think within this metaphor of mirrors, windows, sliding doors, and pillars, that the role of the teacher has to be one in which one is clear about those things. Otherwise, we are in a situation where we're telling students things that they can actually discover on their own.
Mhm.
Because, you know, if I look at if I look at my cell phone, everything that we're teaching students in mathematics in K to 12 and even at university can be done right here.
Mhm.
So there's no need for students to memorize anything.
Mhm.
And there's a greater need for students to develop their ability to solve problems and invent mathematics for themselves
Right. And to interpret what they see.
and interpret. Sure,
Yeah, I love
absolutely.
that because you're really now you're sort of driving home this idea that it's actually pretty challenging to teach math in a way that's transformative for the students that builds their knowledge. And I hope that with the technology, we have this desire to help kids be thinkers, to take ownership of their own learning. And I think one thing that's fundamental is it's rigorous. The mathematics that we're doing is rigorous all along. So
Hmm.
this isn't, we're just not taking the easy way out. It may
Hmm.
be, I may find myself in the math and I might be able to engage with it better. That doesn't mean I'm not working hard. I will blow you away with a really world connection math problem, as probably all of you guys can. That's not what this is. This is about starting at a place that's with self and moving to others. And is that metaphorical with the process, or is it with the actual activities? That's really challenging. And
Yeah.
again, to talk about thinking. Yeah. Any other thoughts that you guys want to add? This is very helpful.
And just one other thing, maybe we need to be teaching less mathematics so
Hmm.
that students can do more mathematics.
Oh, whoa. And that is episode 2, you guys. Because that's quite, but say, what do you mean by that? Why are people going to turn in for that one? What do you mean by that, Arthur? That's very good.
Well, I think the curriculum is crowded because we think that people have to memorize these things.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And the
Right.
things that we're asking students to memorize aren't things that they're going to use.
Mhm. Right. Yes. Right.
But rather, if we engage them in creating mathematics for themselves,
Hmm.
that's something that's transferable that they're going to use in the future.
Right. I like that. That's really that's articulating better what I say. I want my students to be thinkers. How? Well, in
Yeah.
that way. Yeah, that's great.